Our first talk today is all about religious activism, moving mountains, the intersection between faith and activism. The panel is moderated by Father Chris Bedding. Father Chris is an Anglican priest in the Perth Hills and one half of the comedy duo Untitled Pirate Church. Father Chris is also a regular guest on the ABC with his fellow panellist Wurzel Montague as the Holy Heretics. I love that title. So I'd now like to welcome Father Chris to introduce his panel to you. Come on down. Here they come, weaving their way through the stacks. Welcome, Father Chris.
We just cut across. Walk from over there in
It is, but it's kind of very theatrical, really.
It is,
yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
I'll come up onto the stage.
Now? Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Wait for the intro.
It's really great to be here, and thank you for that lovely welcome. And it's wonderful to be here on Wajak Noongar country, and it's always such a blessing to have the welcome and to be honoured by the welcome from elders past and present. And I'm thrilled. We are the first panel, and this is. We've had to come up through the bowels of the building. We've just had to find a last-minute toilet. But everything's fine now, we're ready to go. So as you heard, I actually live in Darlington, so I've had to drive down from the hills today. The great thing about people in Darlington is that we look down on Perth, literally, and also figuratively a lot of the time. It's the Darlington Arts Festival this weekend, so if you've got any time later today or tomorrow, it is okay to go up into the hills and enjoy it. Now today, we are talking about faith and activism, the intersection between those two things. And often when we talk about faith or religion and its influence on the modern world, we think about its alignment with power. So you might, for instance, think about the Church of England, which is my church, where bishops sit in the House of Lords and they pass laws. Or you might think about the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia and Indonesia and their significant influence on civil society and public policy and politics. Or you might think about Hindu nationalists in India and their influence on the way that country is configured. And today, you're probably thinking about white evangelical voters in the USA and their alignment with President Trump. But today we're not here really to talk about religion aligning with the sources of power in the world. We're here to talk about grassroots activists who are working for change in the world, who are using their networks, using their resources, using their faith to try to change the world for the better, a better world, which you'll note is the theme of today's festival. So we're going to welcome each of our guests to the stage one at a time. I'm going to ask them a few questions and then we'll get cracking. So would you please welcome our first guest for today, Marzia Muhammad Ali. Come on down, Marzia. It is a long walk from opening those piles of books. Marzia needs a little lie down. Now, Marzia, really honestly, why are you here today? I understand that you have a research proposal due on Monday morning.
That is correct.
It's okay, right? It's ready. It's nearly ready.
Just editing a few thousand words down.
Okay, easy. And what is your research that you're planning to do over the coming years?
I'm looking at protest photography and particularly my experiences as a protest photographer, and that brings in things like how does my faith affect how I take photos as well.
Amazing. So this is going to lead to a PhD, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Okay, I look forward to the day when we have to call you doctor. And why photography? Why did you get into photography instead of, playing the trumpet or watercolors or something else? Why are you a photographer?
Well, one, I suck at playing instruments, and so the trumpet's out of the question. And I'm also not very good at painting.
Yeah.
But photography, I've always been really interested in photography. I grew up with a camera-mad dad who, loved taking photos of anything and everything. And so it's always been there. It's never been something like, oh, I'm going to be a photographer. It just was a thing. And with protests, it's actually been a way for me to engage with protests and deal with other issues like anxiety and such. So I've managed to combine a few different things and come up with that. And yeah, like I said, the pun's not intended, but things just clicked.
Yeah.
at that intersection. So
I see what you did there.
Ha.
Now, you come from an Islamic family and faith background.
Yes.
How has that influenced your life or been part of your journey?
So I come from a particular group. I'm a Shia Muslim, and that's a minority in the larger Islamic world. But it's a faith tradition that's really founded in activism. So for me, it's not been a question of getting into it. It's been there. It's been a part of my life regardless. It's been a part of that identity since I was very young, that, you know, we're participating in rituals that have very uncanny similarities to the rituals of protest. We talk about amplifying the voices of the oppressed, and that's a foundation principle. We talk about remembering those who have struggled and those who have been killed in the process of, you know, standing up for social justice. As in, those are all concepts that I grew up with before I knew there were English terms for them.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Marzia. You can have a seat because we've got to meet some new people.
All
Friends, I need to warn you though, our next guest, it's her birthday today. So while Jess comes to the stage, we're going to sing. Is everyone ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jess. Happy birthday to you. Congratulations.
That was great. Thank you.
Now, Jess, you're spending your birthday working by the sounds of it.
Yes. I do.
You're part of an organisation, you're working with an organisation called She Runs, which is getting women into politics. Why is that so important to you?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been involved in the union movement, labour movement for 8 years now, officially. And what I've seen in my time in the labour movement is that it is very hard for women who are not card-carrying members of a political party, whether it's Liberal, Labor or the Greens, to actually know how those parties function and what they need to do to make those changes. So my friend and I started She Runs so we could give women increased network to make the change that they want to make. It's not about skilling up women, because you ultimately see political parties say, oh, we need to skill up more women to get them into politics. But women already have the skills. It's just about making sure we can connect them to the right people as well and to break down some of those walls.
Amazing. Now, Jess, you're a Christian person, but you've done that in a whole lot of different ways. Can you tell us all the different ways that you've been Christian over the years?
So I was baptised in the Catholic Church, and that was my tradition, my first Christian tradition. And realised when I was kind of 18, I was like, I don't think this is for me. And then sort of explored Pentecostalism and a few other sort of traditions. And now I just call myself a Christian because I'm I don't know where I fit into that, but it's definitely not, where it started, if that makes sense. But those traditions of social justice in the Catholic Church, which is where I was exposed to Christianity and the way that Jesus led his life by, making sure that people were not oppressed and, tearing down empire, is something I still strongly identify with today.
Amazing. Thanks, Jess. Jess, you're part of one of the bigger churches here in Perth, and we're really looking forward to hearing your perspective. So please choose a seat. Apparently we're choosing seats now. It's no assigned seating. And please, while Jess chooses her seat, would you make welcome Dr. Richard Yin. Come on up.
Thank you.
Now, Richard, you're a GP.
Correct.
Before we go today, can I get a prescription for amoxicillin?
Yes, it's pretty standard, so I do carry my script around here.
I was saying to Richard earlier, that's all my GP ever does. I just walk in, he hands me a script for antibiotics, but I think you're probably slightly more holistic than that, Richard, in your practice.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully, yes.
Now, you are the secretary of a group called Doctors for the Environment. What are Doctors for the Environment doing? Sounds like something here
Doctors for
today.
the Environment just consider the fact that human health is contingent on a healthy planet. So there are a lot of things we take for granted around health, including things like access to clean water, air, food, shelter, a safe climate. And of course, while we've had that for a long period of time, we can understand that these days that's actually not so secure anymore. With climate change, we're noticing changes in terms of air pollution, in terms of heat stress, all those things that make it possible to live are now being threatened with climate change. So the advocacy is very much part of who I am as a doctor.
Amazing. Now, you've been involved in the Buddhist faith tradition teaching and part of the community. Have you always been a Buddhist?
I would be considered a loose Buddhist, but in
Okay.
the, I grew up as a Christian. My mum was brought up in a Christian orphanage. So faith was really strong in my family. And in a weird sort of way, my move towards meditation and towards Buddhism was actually to get away from faith and belief.
Yeah.
So I really find it interesting that I'm back here again talking in a faith-based group about this.
Amazing, Richard. It's so good to have you with us. Our next guest, while you find your seat, is what we call a loose Christian, I think, in the sense that he's on the loose. It's my partner in piracy, the one and only Paul Montague. Would you please make him welcome? Now, it's no secret that we know each other. Sometimes you come and hot desk in my dining room
That's true.
and
true.
steal my air conditioning. That's how I think of it.
Yeah.
It is great to have you here. Why are you concerned about mental health, and what aspect of mental health is really important to you?
So the polite term these days, I have lived experience. Yeah. No, I will out myself as having an acute psychiatric illness, which run in my family like wooden legs.
Yeah.
So amongst my father, my grandparents, all over the family, and neurodivergence generally. So things like autism spectrum disorder, etc., is kind of all over my extended family. So I am particularly passionate about the way that people with any kind of either going through something like a psychotic episode, or people with what was once in a politically incorrect way called low-functioning autism would have so many of their own decision-making and their rights taken away from them. And so, I try to be both an example and an advocate for self-advocacy.
Thank you. And there might be people here today who also have lived experience, that wonderful euphemism, and who are like, what is it about? Why is self-advocacy better than someone else advocating for you?
Okay, so having been through a serious episode myself where I was a little bit out of touch with reality, it was traumatizing to not have what I was taking, because the whole thing is we sort of have this dichotomy, don't we, of someone's sane, someone's insane. And so if someone's displaying any symptoms of being delusional at all, it's like your entire voice is taken away.
Yeah.
So I really want to encourage anyone working in that sector to just listen to people. You don't need to affirm and act on everything they say, but just listen to them and let them know they are heard and they are understood. That's a very important thing. I've known so many people who've been, in a sense, chewed up by the system and very broken, and are now very reticent to seek any help at all when they need it, because their full experience has been that they'll get locked up and they'll just be told they're not making sense, and just sit down and take your medication and you'll be out of here at our whim. And it breaks people.
Sure. Now, 10 or more years ago when we first met, you were one sort of Christian, I can't remember what.
Yeah.
And now 10 years later, you've changed.
Yeah.
As I say, what are you now? What have you been like?
I'm everything. And I'm not very good at any of them. So I've always taken an interfaith perspective. I like to pick and mix from the world's great wisdom traditions in whatever form they come, whether they're theistic or not. And so these days I'm a minister at the Wembley Downs Church of Christ, which I love because it's a congregational polity, meaning there are no bishops, there are no hierarchy. If I burn the bridges there, those people can throw me out. So it's true community at the grassroots, and it's true context in our neighbourhood. So there's no kind of big machinery like you have, Father Chris.
I hadn't noticed the machinery.
I know. You just
passes me by.
Yeah, you're so zen about it.
Well, we're going to get cracking. Would you please make welcome all of our guests? Now, the first question that I have for the panel is really to dig down a little bit into your experience. And this might be a chance for the audience to dig down into your experience. What element of your faith tradition is it that is the most influential on your decision to be an activist? What is it from whether it's the doctrine, the practices, the community, the history, what is it from what you do to feed your spirit that drives you to then work for a better world? And I'm going to start with Richard, because I know that this is actually might be a tricky question for you, because you said you're a loose Buddhist, right? You're not like nobody. You're not going to get elected, the Buddhist spokesperson anytime soon. But what is it about like meditation or something that that drives you then to work for care of the environment?
So there's a number of different schools of Buddhism, and there's one school of Buddhism that emphasizes altruism. And so there's a notion that rather than awakening for oneself, there's a notion of awakening for others. So it moves beyond the idea of self-awakening, but really to awaken a society. And we could try to define that in all sorts of ways, but we're just talking about maybe moving towards something that's a little kinder, a little more tolerant, a little more understanding. So there's this idea that that's what we're trying to move towards. And so it's sort of more a service type role. It's more akin to service in other traditions, except I don't serve anything other than service itself.
Sure.
So the notion is that, and that service might be in the context of my work as a doctor, my work teaching mindfulness or meditation, my work in advocacy. So there's less of a separation between what is my spiritual practice and what is my day job or day jobs. They become one and the same for me. So, and within that context, it then means it moves me to consider, what does it mean to be kinder? What does it mean to be more compassionate, more understanding, if that's what I want for society as well?
So there's an integration. And I think this might emerge already as a theme for us. There's an integration between what you believe and practice in everything. Like it infests everything, if you like.
Yeah, and it's I did struggle with it when I was younger, because there seemed to be this split. I would be living one life around practice in terms of spirituality, and then there'd be this other life in terms of me being a doctor. But over time, I found it necessary that it actually did merge, and through this vehicle, it became possible.
Marzia, you're nodding along here, and so I'm sensing that for you, this is a similar narrative. How does the kind of the photographer, the activist, the researcher, the advocate, and the Shia Muslim migrant woman, how does all of that integrate for you?
Quite a lot, but also leaves me very tired. So I've mentioned this before, that it seems to have been something that I've grown up with, that I had the idea of before I had words for it. It just was. And as Richard was talking, I was reminded of something that a particular cleric once said, that it was talking about the stages of faith, and saying that, if you perform faith out of fear, that's faith of a slave. That if you perform faith out of hope for reward, the faith of a business person. But if you perform faith in ways that is privileging humanity, and because of it being the right thing to do, that's the faith of a free person. And it really resonated with me in that sense. And I mean, the cleric also followed up with saying that means the atheists are the best Muslims, because they don't, do it out of fear of hell or, hope for heaven. So I was just like, that's also a very interesting concept. But it is that idea of, doing it because you believe that it is the right thing to do. And that goes across pretty much anything, whether it's advocacy around refugee rights, whether it's for the environment, whether it's talking about, even living on stolen land, that you're thinking about, how do I engage with my life on a daily basis and everything that I do in that way that is, going with those principles of, this is important, this is something that we really need to think about in terms of hoping and helping and supporting anyone around us. And it ties into another particular saying that I grew up with quite intimately, and we were always told that everyone is your equal, either in faith or in humanity. And so there is not that whole thing, any idea of you need to be opposed to anything except oppression itself. Like there's always that conflict. People say, but what about? And I go, but yeah, what about it? To me, there's not, that conflict isn't there, because everyone is supposed to be equal in faith or humanity, regardless.
Paul, you might remember a few years ago, that time we got arrested, and
that time, yeah.
and they tried to put three of us into the back of the police van, and the two of us are not small men, but fortunately the third man was very small because he had to sit kind of smushed in between us. And I'm also remembering too, walking through the streets of Northbridge, pulling a model church at the Pride Parade. And we were dragging the church into the future together. It wasn't very heavy, it was made of paper, but the symbolism was there. Now, so, and there's a myriad other kind of actions that everyone on this panel has taken for justice. What is it from your particular faith tradition and worldview that drives you to want to take action?
Well, I'm going to give the stock cliche and say Jesus. So I was.
You're taking my answer away from me.
I'm sorry. Well, okay. Well, so I was Sunday schooled in a very conservative, aggressively middle class community. My family community, the whole thing, and we were very much told who was below us and who was above us.
Sure.
A very hierarchical, kind of feudal view of the world. But the problem is they kept teaching us stories from the gospel, Jesus' parables, and this message of universal love and equality and full humanity and love was coming through again and again to me. And I was a bit like, wait a minute. And what I kept getting was the message that I am no less than anybody and nobody is less than me. And so the whole church thing, at the age of 9, I went, I'm an atheist. This is all ridiculous because of the church, not because of the stories. And was sort of, but then I became one of those zealous adult converts in my 20s, mainly radicalized by the Catholic worker movement, which I met through the student union movement at uni. And so that had a huge impact on me because, again, it's faith in action. And then I'm also hugely influenced by the 13th century mendicant movement, so of which St. Francis is probably the most famous example universally. So those people who said, well, I've got 2 copper pieces and a pair of sandals and I'm going out there to work in the world as kind of my sense of connection with divinity in the wider humanity. So yeah, it's a lot I could bang on. I'm not going to.
Yeah. Jess, as lucky last in this particular part of the conversation, you're a union thug, basically. I mean, I think that's the technical term.
Yeah.
And you're working very actively for workers' rights and also around women's empowerment in the political process. So, and let me put it this baldly, right? When people think Christians in politics, they think Tony Abbott being best friends with George Pell. They think Scott Morrison and that picture in the church, with his hand raised. Not that there's anything wrong with worshipping God in that way, but that might be the alignment. But that's not where the sort of the area that you're working that's driving you. So what is it that drives you to do the type of work that you're involved in? Yeah,
definitely. And I think it's probably more in subversive ways, to be honest. So, like what Paul was saying about Jesus being that person who identified with the oppressed and the brokenhearted. And that doesn't mean that I go into work every day and go, oh my gosh, you're oppressed, you're brokenhearted, you need me, into an aged care facility or a union meeting or a worker meeting, because they can totally self-advocate for themselves. They probably don't really need me there. But the way that I see it is that, we are fighting empire. An empire can look like the government. It can look like these Christian organisations that run our aged care facilities. It can look like a whole bunch of different things. But when I sit there in an enterprise bargaining agreement meeting with workers, I do see them as the people who are the ones that love and care and are the very hands and feet of Jesus, if we want to go that deep. And for me, in terms of the union movement and politics, and Christianity, I kind of just see the ways about, okay, how can I live my life out in such a way that I can create a platform for others, not to be a voice for others, but to make sure I amplify what they're going through. So that's how I kind of identify myself, being a Christian, working in the union movement, being a union thug. And it doesn't always look pretty because, in Australia, there's a particular view of what a Christian should look like, and they should be conservative and they should be white and they should be against all the things that I'm advocating for on a daily basis. So it's just about making that decision every day to continue doing what you're doing, and like, how can I be the hands and feet of Jesus in this circumstance?
I just want to explore that more with you, because I'm imagining you don't around the workplace or on sites go in and go, oh, everyone, if you've got a minute, I'd like to share the good news with Jesus with you, over the coffee table. I'm guessing you're not that kind of person.
No.
But also you don't hide the fact that you're a person of faith, and you're quite open about that. It's, I found out. So, how
I just found out. No, I'm joking.
like what we might call evangelism, being sharing good news. What does it look like for you? If it's not either the stereotype of being like, handing out pamphlets, and it's not hiding it. How do you like sort of embody good news somehow?
I think you just need to be it. You know what I mean? Like, if there's a situation that you don't like, or you don't like what someone is going through at a workplace, or, there's something you're not comfortable with, like, you do just have to speak out. And, it does get uncomfortable at times, but you just need to be that good news. Like, you need to, I don't sit there and think to myself, what would Jesus do in this situation? But I do think to myself, how can I help this person, or how can I get the best outcome for this person? So I know you act with a spirit of love and a spirit of faith, and hopefully that is able to just flow out into your entire life if you're walking that life, Yeah.
So it's sort of that sense of integration that Richard first raised. That it's not about having bringing your religion to the workplace, or bringing your work to the world of religion, but just being your authentic self in that context.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. Now, I want to explore with panelists, why do you do the kind of work that you do in the activism space? Like, you can do anything, right? And there are people who spend a lot of energy, like with the school P&C, because that's really important work. And then there are people who chain themselves to bulldozers, usually not at a P&C meeting, right? So what's driven you to do what you do? And Marzia, I want to start with you here, because like, I see you're everywhere in Perth for taking photos of rallies and protests and actions and parades and all of that. And you told us a bit about what motivates you there, but I know that it's not just for you that you're taking those photos. Why photographing rallies in particular?
So my own background feeds quite heavily into this, in terms of being someone who sits at various intersections that are not the majority view, or not the dominant one. So I experience things individually. And so that's part of the motivation. But a really big part, and this happened very early on when I started doing protest photography, and I was taking photos of protests that were about the actions that were happening in Palestine, and particularly in Gaza. And at that point in time, I knew a few people who were from Gaza, but I did not know, people intimately who were living there and such. And this kind of sticks with me every time I kind of go, why am I doing this? And, this is really like, why am I still here? Why are we still protesting and such? Is that I got this Facebook message, very random. And it was from someone who was there. Their cousin lived in Perth and had shared my photos to their Facebook.
Yeah.
And this person in Palestine had seen the photos and messaged me through that and said, thank you for showing us that people care, that people actually know what's happening, to us. And that's the big reminder to me, is that it's not just taking photos, it's documenting history. Yes, it's, that personal motivation to be involved, but there's also other people who draw strength and who, need to know that there are people who believe in them and who are fighting for them. And I've had variations on that through the years, like people from people who are in detention centers, for example, and their only mode of communication previously would be through a clandestine mobile phone, and now it's a little bit more open, but initially it wasn't. And they would be like, they would send things that they wanted people to hear. They would ask, people to speak on their behalf, or they would send recordings that would be played at protests, or their images would be put into the protest. That so it's almost like I'm doing a photography of the people who are absent,
Sure.
and taking those spaces in between and relaying back that you might not be here, but we are remembering you, and we're considering you as part of this community, and considering your advocacy, your self-advocacy, as part of this as well, and amplifying that. And to me, that's the real sort of value in a lot of what I do, is that communication and bringing people in who aren't necessarily able to be there because of systematic issues.
Sure.
And it goes back to a quote by Arundhati Roy, that is really the underpinning of one of my practice. And I use this everywhere, so people know me, have heard this a million times. But the quote is from her lecture at the Sydney Peace Prize, and she said, "There's no such thing as the voiceless.
Yeah.
There are only the deliberately silenced and the preferably unheard."
Yeah.
And so that's what is underpinning my practice of photography, is amplifying those who are deliberately silenced, and those who are preferably unheard, those who are hidden away, those who are locked away and told you can't speak. I always argue with the whole voice for the voiceless thing. I just like, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
It is saying they have a voice and bringing it to the fore, even when they physically can't be there. And that's kind of the underpinnings of what I do.
I might bring Paul in because I have a question about this very issue around the voices and the visibility of queer people, and particularly of queer people of faith. And I know, Marzia, you've taken some very fetching photos of me at rallies for marriage equality and so on. And I know, Paul, we've marched alongside at events and worked on campaigns together. And why do people like us here who feel safe to do so, from our faith perspective, advocate for queer rights? Why is that important? Why does that matter?
Well, at a very basic level, I want, LGBT folks, particularly trans folks right now, to know that people of faith love them, and because the message out there that, for any queer folks to be picking up a message that people of faith just despise them and consider them less than, that's entirely reasonable. The way it's, the loudest voices in the room kind of dominate with that message. So, and just to signal, it's all everybody. An attack on everybody, an oppression on anybody's human rights is oppressing all of our human rights. And so, this whole, there's no us and them, there's only us. So for me, it's just kind of a no-brainer. You just, you just show up. Yeah. And that's often all I do.
But Marzia, as a Muslim person present in that context, that's probably more rare, certainly in Australia. But I'm conscious that for queer Muslims, they often can't be visible about their faith. So is that important to you, to be sort of present as an ally and supporter and advocate in that space?
It's really important to show that, well, there are queer Muslims in the first place. It's like, it's not a rare unicorn that, is a mythical creature. It's just that, the narratives around queerness and the narratives around Muslimness have been thought to be mutually exclusive. And please stop me if I start getting more into research, because I literally wrote an entire, page on this the other day about, how important it is to have that representation and make it visible. But, it's not something that is, these are two identities that aren't mutually exclusive. And it's been put that way, that this is the traditional way of going. And it's difficult when, for example, a lot of Muslim spaces are gendered. And if you're someone who's non-binary, then, it's like, where do you belong? How do you engage with those traditional Muslim spaces? And what I found is that there are other Muslim spaces that, confront that and say, well, we want to include people and we don't want them turning away from faith, but we don't want them to deny their identities in other spaces either. And so that in itself is a form of activism, is living that true self, of
Sure.
you know, embracing your queerness in whatever form it might take, and your Muslimness in whatever form it might take.
So the religious landscape in Australia is consistently changing. We're becoming a less religious country, and even the people who used to tick C of E or Catholic as, you know, just as a default, even that's changing, and that probably, perhaps as a consequence, the religious voices in Australia are typically getting more conservative, and often aggressive too. I mean, that's my experience, is that it's sometimes quite abrasive, the types of voices that we're hearing. And yet there's also grassroots voices of people of faith that are engaged at the local level. And Richard, I would suspect that the environment movement doesn't, you know, it doesn't always feel like, when I think, oh, environment movement, yes, there must be a lot of Buddhist meditating as part of that, or there must be a lot of mindfulness practice going on. But actually there is, right? There are people who are deeply concerned about the environment, who are also trying to, you know, to engage with their own spiritual life, or their own, you know, their own personhood somehow.
There probably isn't enough, to be truthful, Chris. I don't think there's probably enough. I think it opens up a dialogue about values for me, because I think the repository, the discussion around values is such an important idea, and there's very few places where that's actually upheld. And one of the places it is upheld is in the context of faith groups. You know, and what is it that we actually stand for? What is actually meaningful? And these are dangerous times. They're dangerous times in the context of the conflicts, the divisions within societies, the division of politics along a whole number of lines. And there's a real chance of fracturing along the lines of either gender or race or class. There's a whole number of tensions that now exist. And I think it's critical that somehow faith groups can come together. This would be my enormous vision, that faith groups could come together that would express a common value. So coming from their faith, but expressing some common universal value of kindness or compassion or understanding that could hold that tension, to understand that we're all in this together. Because when we approach those tensions, those issues, they're very confronting for many people. So how do we do that in a meaningful way and still hold to the idea that we're in this together? We only got this one planet, for me. This is my only home, and it's a shared home, and we can't do this unilaterally. So it is that we come together in some way.
Richard, you've touched on something, and I want to sort of state it boldly as a proposition, that whatever movement, whatever campaigns, whatever work people are doing towards a better world, people of faith have to be at the table, not dominating, not controlling, but present at the table, both for our own, what I would call salvation, for our own good, and also for the good of the world. Jess, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it does. And it resonates with what Richard was saying about people coming together. And I see incredible value of people of faith coming to the table. And I think the difference that we have compared to politicians and, you know, all the rest of it is to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, and to acknowledge that we can see each other's humanity when we're making decisions or talking about ideas or talking about race, when we're talking about gender, that we would actually see each other's humanity in that. And that's why more people of faith should come to the table, and also as well amplify the voices of others, and to give other people a seat at the table who might not be of faith, but might be a person that, you know, we're talking about those issues, but we're talking about those issues without the person that's actually facing that, you know, the lived experience sort of comment that we made before. Yeah.
And I think too, speaking particularly about Christian churches, which still are the majority religious group in Australia, churches are deceptively diverse, like multicultural, diversity in income, in age, and in politics and worldview. And that, I suspect, can be part of what we bring, is that our connection at a grassroots level with small kind of collectives in the community. You would experience that in your church community, where you actually have to come across people who don't align necessarily with your worldview, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like at the many churches I've gone to, everyone has had different incomes, different ideas, different worldviews. And it's like, how can we bring that all together? And instead of just cancelling someone out for their idea, they might not have ever been exposed to an idea that I'm presenting to them, to acknowledge that, and to talk more to people of other faiths as well, you know, because sometimes our view of people with other faiths is what we see on the TV or what we see on the radio or what a politician says. So there needs to be more common dialogue between all people of different faiths as well. Yeah.
Paul, as the token straight white man on the panel,
You presume a lot.
what do religious groups have to do you think, to not just contribute, but to ensure that the kind of the fullness of our faith communities contribute? Because like hearing from just the Archbishop of Sydney or just the Grand Mufti is one thing, but actually hearing from the diversity of voices is another. What changes might we have to make?
I know for myself, at least, recognising that I am a middle-aged white man with a deep voice, so I've got all the tools to be oppressor. So I need to get off the platform, and I think in a church congregation or parish or whatever religious group where predominantly it is, you know, middle class and up, English as a first language, you know, broadly Anglo-Celtic people, we actually need to open up the space. And so we're property owners in our little suburban congregation. We're trying to invent ourselves more and more as a community hub that happens to host a church on a Sunday morning. So in a sense, we need to shut up in the public space, this is my take, people like me especially, and just make room, make space and hand the platform over, and ensure that our spaces feel genuinely safe and accessible. Not putting a big "we welcome everybody" sign on the door, but making them genuinely accessible, genuinely safe for everyone, and saying, please come in, and whatever resources we can offer you, whether that's financial, whether it's space, whatever it is, whether it's just our people feeding you, or making your event happen, like please, like we're here to do that for you. So that's my sort of big thing at the moment. So that it's just hospitality.
Yeah. And a ground up approach, rather than trying to get to the source or the top of the sources of power, but to actually work from the local community, which actually for people of faith, this is what we do, right? This is our, we get together and we meditate, we get together and we worship, we get together and we pray to discuss, to learn, and it's not just unions and not just campaign groups that gather like this. And actually my former Shire president now, said to me once, she said, oh, actually, if I just come here on Sunday morning, I can access a bigger cross-section of the community than I can if I have if the local government has a consultation, nobody comes. But if I just front up to your church on Sunday morning, I'll be able to have the conversations that might be valuable. Now, we're going to open up to questions from the audience. And I just want to emphasize that word, questions. So we love comments so much, but questions are what we're here for today. So, particularly questions that you might want to put to the panel. We won't have very long, but that opportunity is coming. But before and while you think about your questions, I want to put to the whole panel. I'm going to start with you, Marzia, and then just work along the line. If for our audience here today, if you wanted them to know one thing about faith, or the intersection of faith and activism, what would you want them to take away from you today?
Big question.
Yeah.
Don't assume. That's probably my biggest one, because if people don't know me and they just read my name on something, their assumption is usually, and this is because probably my last name, male, conservative, usually with a beard, with a thick accent, someone who will be, who would have values that don't align with what's considered contemporary or whatever. And then I walk in and they go, what?
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing, is that don't make that assumption. And I'll be honest, there are Muslims who would espouse values and base it on faith that are not necessarily considered progressive, or who would be exclusive in the way that they run their faith. I'm not going to shy away from that. And there's a big history of wars fought over that.
Yeah.
But that's not it.
Yeah.
You know, someone who I knew very well in uni said to me that when I first met you, I didn't know what you would be like. And then you started speaking and I was like, I want to know this person a lot more. And this person is a, you know, big queer bikey person,
Yeah.
you know, and has been an absolute joy to know. And, you know, has even come to rallies specifically that I want to make sure that you're okay.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that friendship with that person because it's based on giving a chance to, and for us both giving a chance to each other,
Yeah. Yeah.
to getting to know each other and what we're about, and realizing that we stand for more in we have more in common than differences.
Sure.
Even though, like, if we're standing together, people kind of go, what's
Yeah.
going on here? You know?
Yeah.
Just don't make that assumption about anything, whether it's race or gender or education or sexuality or whatever.
Jess, what final thought would you like to leave about faith and activism?
Yeah, I think don't tie your faith to a political party, and it's such a big statement to make. But really, like, faith looks very different from a political party, and we can kind of get sucked into that. And the next part was that faith is an incredibly beautiful and complex journey. Where you started will not be where you finished. And it's okay. It's okay to change your mind about things and to go back and talk to friends. It's okay. And it looks different for everyone.
Richard, what do you want these people to hear?
So for me, it's more about about the practice of something called mindfulness, and mindfulness sits as the foundation of lots of Buddhist practice. And fundamentally, the understanding of mindfulness is a capacity to stay open, interested, connected, kind within a situation, no matter how difficult, how awkward that situation is. So for me, it's the idea is to actually, in taking it into activism, you do exactly the same thing. It's not about them against us against them. It's not a polarizing. You just go to that situation with that openness and try to work with the situation as is without any prejudice about who that person on the other side of the table is, trying to move towards a better outcome, considering those as key ideas or key values. So for me, the approach matters. How we approach the issue matters.
Paul, final word.
A final word. Wow. Okay. So for me, the most what I like about seeking wisdom, seeking growth, seeking, you know, through whatever religious narratives, non-religious narratives, in community, in a community of purpose, is the constant asking the question, so what? So, you know, I'm not very evolved, so I tend to scoff at people that say, I've been saved by Jesus, or they say, I've been doing so much meditation, I'm so woke now, or whatever the thing is. And to which one question is always, so what? What are you going to do about it? So you've figured out that you're loved and accepted and forgiven? Great. What are you going to do about that? That for me is always the question, you know, so what? And to me, it doesn't, whether it's a faith activist community, whether it's the XR movement, whatever it is, if you've got a community you belong to that's driven for a purpose, then ultimately that's you know, selfishly, that's good. It's good for you as an individual, and hopefully it has a knock-on effect to the world.
Well, it's time for questions now. Someone's going to come to you with a microphone. And just a reminder that we're asking questions of the panel, and I might direct it to particular people. Who's first? I can't see. Who's first? Who gets the first one? Huh?
Oh, you're holding. Ooh.
Please stand up and say your name.
Hi, I'm Marianne. Thank you, panel, and thank you for the introductions and all your views. I'd like to know, how do you help someone who is overwhelmed by the issues, especially the destruction of habitat?
Thanks, Marianne. Overwhelmed by the issues, especially the destruction of habitat. That's quite common, actually. I can speak for that myself. I look and go, what can I even do? Richard, you are our environment guy. I mean, you know, how would you respond to someone who feels just overwhelmed by it, or where do they even start?
I completely understand. I completely understand and empathize and understand that you're not alone in this situation, because it is a really difficult topic when you understand what is actually happening. So there's a notion that one should first of all be a bit kind to oneself and understand that one is suffering and take care of oneself, and that's absolutely critical. So caring for oneself is important within advocacy and when you engage in difficult topics. I would probably add another idea that maybe is a bit challenging. One is, the idea is fundamentally, this is an incredible place that we live in. It's an incredible place and opportunity, and I don't mean just Perth. I again go back to this idea of this one planet. We're incredibly fortunate, right, to have an opportunity to live in this place where there's very few others like it around, actually. And so each day for me, reflecting on that is a reflection on gratitude. And gratitude can sustain you, and you can hold both gratitude and your difficulties. And if you do that, it's easier to hold the difficulties. So if you can have gratitude as a basis for your life and situate your difficulties in that, it becomes something very powerful. You can actually begin to work with that in some way and keep on moving and work with that difficulty. And that's not dismissing that it's hard, but there's a way of going forward.
I think we're going to let Richard have the word there. Who's our next question? There was a hand up, perhaps over here. I'm not really choosing the questions. I'm just letting them emerge organically. Someone will get a microphone any second now.
A couple of hands over here.
Hi, my name's Regan. My question is, I guess, as kind of a young person who is queer and has never really explored faith or religion in any aspect, how can I explore that in a way that's going to be safe and not have to worry about what place to go to? I had a friend who is gay, and he went to a church on his very first night. They talked about how, you know, it was bad, being homosexual was bad. How can I, explore that and find out what places I can go to where I know I will be accepted?
Regan, thank you for asking that question, and thank you for naming the reality that there are unsafe faith traditions and faith communities for queer people. Can I do a little plug for Equal Voices WA, which is the Christian queer peak body, Equal Voices nationally. I'm the Secretary of Equal Voices WA. And something that I get a lot is a message that says that exact question: where can I go where I'm going to be safe and not condemned? And the answer is, there are places you can go. There are faith leaders that you can talk to, but you want to know the honest truth as well? I can't just list all their names on a website because they're going to get attacked. And that's the reality of the world that we live in. And the tragedy, I think, of being a person of faith today who wants to support queer people, that we can't just always just put a sign up that says, you're welcome and we're going to fly the rainbow flag, even if that's true. But alongside that, and I'm sorry, I'm going to let other people speak in a second, but alongside that, I'd want to say that if you are able, if you have the strength and the capacity and the support to engage with a faith community that's safe for you, please do. We need the voices of queer people and of all sorts of diversity in our faith communities. We are less, we are impoverished when those voices are absent. And as a faith leader, we need to, we need to get better at seeing those voices coming into our communities as a gift rather than as a threat. But I just want to see if there's others on the panel who feel like they want to add something to that. Marzia, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. I talk about being unmosqued in that I don't actually attend a physical mosque space here, and I haven't for a while. Like when I go and visit my parents at home, I'll go, and that's where I grew up and such. But there are alternative spaces that are actually founded by queer people of faith that are meant to be safe, and we're finding those places are translating from online spaces into physical spaces as well. Now, in Australia, the ones I'm aware of, unfortunately, aren't in Perth. But, there is a gay imam who runs, services in Melbourne, for example. And those are, again, they reach out online. There's, Sydney queer Muslims. There's a whole range of groups out there that have recognized that there needs to be a space for people to come as they are, regardless of all of their identities. You know, and it's not negating any of them. It's saying, no, we embrace all of these different aspects of you and yourself, and they are all valid. And it's finding those, and it's very much like you've said, Chris, is that
Got to be
you
Sherlock
can't-
Holmes. Like
you can't list them. And so the Unity Mosque, which is actually based out of Canada, you know, they literally have on their thing that they keep changing their physical location because of that fear. But they run an international mosque that is based on principles of equality, that is based on, you know, welcoming people who are from various sectarian backgrounds, but also who are non-binary and trans. And, you know, one of the things I really had the privilege of seeing was a trans woman leading prayer recently. And they, you know, broadcasted over Zoom to the whole world. And encourage people to get involved. And but it is that thing of finding people who are going to be part of that community because of the very realistic issues that come up from more conservative groups about, you know, engaging. So that's just an experience that I'm sharing.
Can I say we've had two really great questions, and I'm so pleasantly surprised that nobody's grandstanded. So if you have one last question, if you really feel like you have perhaps over the back there, there's one last question that we can respond to today before we bring things to a close, and it's going to be a rapid fire response from us. Tell us your name, please.
Hi, I'm Boaz, and Richard sort of already answered my question, but I'd be interested to hear what other people say. As someone who doesn't have religious faith, but I guess sometimes I almost wish that I did, to just sort of have something to hold on to hope for. And I guess Richard said that that gratitude can be something, but I guess what would you just say to people who don't necessarily have religious faith, but want to, I guess, have some sort of, I don't know, hope or faith in the world, I guess?
Yeah. Paul, what would you say?
I would say, so before in my adult life, I was a theist. I really gravitated. So human beings, we're narrative animals, and we're all about stories and mythology, and I say that with absolute reverence for the term. So you know, look at all the world's great wisdom traditions, and you can drop theism and the notion of magical thinking entirely, and just and look for those stories of hope and resilience, and even if you rest there before coming back to, because here's the thing: despair, anger in response to injustice and suffering, all those emotions are entirely valid, and I would say entirely holy. And if they drive you just to take action and to seek restoration and recovery for people on the planet, then use that drive you. But come back to rest. Come back to rest and self-care and boundaries, as we talked about, and in that time fill yourself up with stories of hope. It doesn't mean believing in a God or whatever kind of supernatural constructs. Rest in hope.
Friends, we're going to finish there, and I'm going to stand up, and we're all going to stand up actually, so that we can say our final farewells. Could you please offer your thanks to, wait for it, Marzia, Jess, Richard and Paul, and I'm Chris. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day.